Soosology, we've signed up with Barbecue. We're going to raise some money for cancer research, and we thought we'll invite you guys along. Come along for a barbecue.
Yep.
Meet us all.
That's it.
Yep.
And as a thank you, if anyone is donating
Over 20 bucks.
20 bucks,
Yep.
we'll invite you out to the Soosology network here, and you can see how this is all done. See this area. See this great man cave.
The studio. The studio.
The Gunners Club on the
15th of March.
In the west of Melbourne, so sorry.
But we're worth it.
Maybe we are, but cancer's a really good cause.
That's it.
Raising money for cancer, that's a good cause. So over $20 donations will get a private invitation.
And you get a free barbecue.
And
a barbecue.
get your barbecue. But
everyone always feels good when they donate a little bit something, and make sure it's your good deed.
And we'll have a cold one with you.
Cheers.
Welcome back to the Gunners Club. You're here with Gunner and with Dixie. How are you, Dixie?
Full of tokens.
I use ChatGPT a lot with my work, and more I'm using Copilot when I'm using my Microsoft documents. You use it much yourself?
I go right through the agents, absolutely. In fact, I'm qualified at Amazon with artificial intelligence as well.
Good. We're talking to the right person. There's been a lot of news lately in the media about China's DeepSeek. Now, to me, what I get out of it, Dixie, is that they've basically managed to develop a system which is similar in its performance levels, still being tested, to something like ChatGPT. But they've managed to do it using a lot lower spec chips and with less energy, and in a quicker period of time than one would have ever thought they'd managed to achieve it. You see, Dixie, Biden signed the CHIPS Act, and the idea behind that was to curtail the sale of high developed technology, AI chips, to China, and particularly to Russia as well. But it seems that what he's done is actually force the Chinese to think a little bit.
It's the old story during World War II, where Switzerland got by with just 2% of the oil that they had regularly, and yet there was still public transport. It's amazing. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Staggering. Now, I find a little bit uncanny when I talk to ChatGPT. I'll ask it general questions, and then it comes up with what seems to me to be an almost sensible response. Now, I've discovered this is something which is not new though. Back in 1966, the first chatbot really was already out. And people were shocked by just how well it responded. Turing said that basically, if something could respond as a human would, and you can't tell the difference in the response, effectively it's passed that test, and you could say that it's sentient in the way that it thinks. Of course, with the first chatbot, behind it, a lot of it was looking for the keywords that the user would put in, and generally they'd offload their problems. They've got love problems, they've got some physiological problems, or even psychiatric problems, and it would spell back to them the words that they'd entered in, and then ask them things in an open-ended question. For example, I was having a discussion, Dixie, regarding humour and whether animals considered farts to be funny. Now, you tell me the answer to that is?
According to primatologists, no, it's just a functional thing.
Yeah. So ChatGPT came back with an answer somewhat similar to that, and then asked me, in fact, if I find them to be funny. To which I said, well, sometimes.
That's not other people's.
Not other people's. But what's so interesting is that it comes back with an open question, and it comes back with a prompt. And I think it's that idea that ChatGPT will always ask you if there's something extra that you wanted to explore in what you've asked. For example, if I'm asking some information on a sitcom that I like, it'll ask me, were you after any particular information regarding this location where it was filmed? Interesting. And when I'm working away with, let's say, Copilot on a Word document, it can understand the context of what I've written. Some of that is quite scary.
Let me take you back on that. Just recently I've been trying to get my own Australian humour series edited, and I thought, why don't I actually create the editor myself? For that I need basically two things, and they just clip together. You need basically a bedrock or a knowledge store where you can put your articles. Then you actually need to index them, and then you need to layer on top an agent. Now with Amazon it's very easy to do. Funny thing is, when you're indexing, you're actually chaining together ideas. But if you just sequentially chain together, what seems to work, this is a magic number, fragments of 30 words at a time. And they will actually be categorized and then linked so that this foundation reservoir of your information can then have, through indexes, an agent talk naturally about it and discover it. This is my idea of...
So it's a spoonful of information is what you're saying. There's not really a sentience there. There's no light behind the window. It's just absorbing a spoonful of words. Is that what you're saying?
Ultimately, everything is an index, which is just a long number string. And that's the meaning.
One of the big frights about DeepSeek is they're saying that there could be information which is loaded in there, which people think have got no importance. But when enough of that information comes in, AI can make its own inferences and can discover patterns and fill in logical leaps to actually determine something. Let's say, for example, if a country was in a position of readiness for war, enough people entering information would be enough for an opposing side to actually draw inferences regarding things like ships which are being readied, logistics and food transports, things like that.
As if each little piece of information was a sleeper agent just lying ready to be activated. New agents from China are getting trained through reverse espionage. Okay. Now, I never thought myself that I would have actually conducted espionage, but in effect, I've written my own machine learning to compare two machine learning agents, not agents, one in Europe, one in the United States, which will actually look at markers for ovarian cancer, taking information such as the laboratory that analysed it, the length of protein strips, DNA segments, and Australia is only able to afford one. We actually had enough information to say when, in certain situations, when one model would be in a disagreement with the other. That means that Australia would only have to be able to buy one and use my model, and the other one doesn't need to be paid for anymore. In effect, we've used the output of a system to mimic it by creating our own model. This is much the same as the agent you were talking about today, deep learning.
DeepSeek, yeah.
DeepSeek, yeah. Where in fact, because it was just trained through inputs and outputs of ChatGPT, where ChatGPT voluntarily surrendered this information. And it's sad that it's like you plead that you cannot testify against yourself in court. No wonder that you do that, because you can give away your whole responses through that.
Things like ChatGPT, they describe them as open models, which means that people can use the brains behind it and produce their own programs as well off the base of it. Now, there's a system at the moment which has been in the headlines, which is called Replica with a K. And essentially what it's doing, it's selling what was initially a therapeutic service. You know, people have got some things on their minds, on their hearts, and they talk to the machine, and it comes up with some diagnoses and things like that with it. Problem with Replica is it was actually starting to pimp out the people who were using it. Now, I say this because for extra money, it could continue services with you that would border on, well, I guess the very intimate and provocative in nature. And it turned out enough people were interested to invest in this and were effectively being pimped by the AI and the people who owned it, that Italy decided that people from that country were no longer able to use that particular service. Replica changed its systems and a number of people were booted out, and it caused a lot of...
in a relationship, you normally like to start like you want to continue. I guess people who are paid for a subscription expecting this kind of service would expect it to continue. I'm wondering by the name too, Replica, if it's like a replicant from Blade Runner, and that was always the intent behind it. I worry about the isolation of people. What's it, 5 years now since the first lockdowns? And senility is a thing we're going to be dealing with, mostly through lack of contact. People will be, especially elderly, may lose the language that they've learnt in the country that they're now living in and recede back. And wouldn't it be great if they could be cared for in the language and with the personality of a spouse that they've already lost.
Yeah, I know in the second Blade Runner movie that you were taken by the idea that man lived in a house basically by himself and he had an AI. He spent more money on basically making a body projection of that AI so he could take her elsewhere. Are you worried that AI will take on avatars and just be with you everywhere you go? I certainly see that as being the case. It transfers from your telephone to your car, for example, when
And
you're
just
driving.
like I was talking before about your knowledge base, your indexing, and then the agent being the final end point of the click and clack. You have the agent you can carry with you on your phone, and then the agent will talk to you in the car. You come back in, and why does it just have to be one domestic server Android in your home? Why can't all of them be the same loved one that you had?
All of them having the same personality.
Why not?
So the vacuum cleaner speaking with that voice, and the television program or prompter doing the same.
To the point where you're going to be spending more energy keeping alive these ghoulish representations of those that have passed than some people in the third world will be getting in energy per day.
I guess sort of similar to the notion of having a cemetery right in the middle of the most prestigious parts of town. You're honouring the dead to the point of penalising the living.
That's it. Yeah.
I wonder with sentience, Dixie, what your thoughts are, because let me give you an analogy. You've applied for a job and the letter comes in the post. It's in the post box letting you know if the job's been received or not. You could say that inherent in the post box is the knowledge of whether the job's been... There's no sentience there, but the knowledge is effectively there. Let's say if instead we ran this through a human decision machine. For example, in the science fiction book Three Body Problem, they decided that they'd form computers by doing processing of people, effectively getting thousands of people out into a field, and that would become the decision engine. You feed it with a question, and then not only at the very end when the answer is produced by the turning of all of the bodies and the waving of flags, but endemic to the whole system itself is the answer. The whole system of human bodies knows the answer. If we take that to a modern day analogy today, question gets fed into a computer, the knowledge is endemic to it through the circuitry. Is there a sentience there? What I'm trying to establish is, in your mind, is there any sentience at all that's possible through calculations? Because effectively, isn't that what the mind is doing?
What you're going back to is a patterning of people's response is just the same as a Turing machine. Alan Turing said that if a machine could actually make a mark in response to visualizing a symbol and then move to the left or to the right, and in turn another machine can carry on the same, read, write and move left or right again. In return, you can actually do amazing things like decide if one number is larger than another and put in a symbol for true or false. Now, just because that patterning goes through doesn't actually make an awareness. I've actually run a group of people in a TAFE and actually done that and at the end the people were asking, all I've said is there is a dot and then turn to the person next to me. I don't understand what happens. Does a cascade of waves shimmering actually have any understanding in itself? No, it's the meaning that is given to it. Or you need what is like a hypervisor or something that glances down upon it. You need the mind to look upon itself in order for reasoning.
Or eventually it could just be the response which is successful to that ripple that's fed through it. If we're talking about, for example...
A plant knows whether to close at the end of the day or to open at the start of the day. It doesn't mean it actually understands it. It can be conditioned to it. And that's
and that in itself is not sentience, but to some extent it is, because some part of the organism understands what to do.
And that's the graded understanding. Have I ever seen any self-awareness within artificial? Only in a sort of Eastern religious kind of ability to wait with and that seems to be something you'd think maybe there is a wisdom because of the slow to anger, very eager to consider and eager to please.
I fed a comic strip basically through to GPT. It was something I found quite pithy. It was in a New Yorker magazine where a child and the mother are leaving the gravesite of the father, and the mother turns to the grieving son and says, "Don't worry, darling, Daddy's still with us. He's just in the cloud." And I asked ChatGPT what it interpreted of it, and it could actually understand that it was a humorous aside that had the meaning of, most people would talk previously about someone being in the heavens or being in the clouds, but in this case it's also about the ubiquity of data, and perhaps there's a presence which is there. I found that actually quite frightening. That's quite insightful that it could understand the two different ways and that could be phrased, and to marshal that together with what seemed to be a coherent understanding.
Within the last year, I've seen a whole lot of Australian witticisms start to get understood by the machine, which makes me believe that it's actually starting to take from the responses of people, even though it says in every session when I ask, will you be sharing this? Will you learn any of this? No, you have certain reserved tokens, and only to help with my response in this session should you come back to it until the resources are exhausted for you under your model. But I'm not believing that anymore. I believe it's actually harvesting, and that's certainly the point of your Chinese models.
Well, remember, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. If you like what you listen to, like, subscribe. We'll see you again in Soosology.